All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are tackling a huge but super important topic, chemotherapy. We're going to break down how these anti-cancer drugs actually wage war on a cellular level. It's a fascinating battle plan.
At its very heart, this is the one question every single anti-cancer drug is trying to answer. See, cancer is basically a rebellion of our own cells. They've gone rogue, they ignore all the signals to stop growing, and they just multiply like crazy. So the real challenge is, how do you stop this mutiny without, destroying the whole system?
Now, this diagram might look a little intense, but for what we're doing today, I want you to think of it as a strategic battle map. It shows the entire life cycle of a cell. This is the battlefield where the fight against cancer happens. Every single phase, every arrow is a potential target. We're going to use this map to figure out the enemy's moves and our best strategies for attack.
So before we can even talk about the weapons, we have to understand the target. The real key to chemotherapy is exploiting the cancer cell's greatest strength, which also happens to be its greatest weakness, that relentless, unstoppable drive to divide.
Okay, so here's the bottom line. Healthy cells are polite. They grow, they divide, and they know exactly when to stop. They listen to the signals around them. Cancer cells, they're the complete opposite. It's like their foot is jammed on the gas pedal and they've cut the brake lines, which leads to that endless, out-of-control multiplication.
So every single dividing cell, whether it's healthy or cancerous, follows this basic schedule. First, it grows up in the G1 phase. Then comes the really critical part, the S phase, where it has to copy its entire DNA blueprint perfectly. In G2, it does some final quality checks. And then finally, in the M phase, mitosis, it physically splits into two brand new cells. This cycle is the key to absolutely everything.
All right, let's move on to our first attack plan. This strategy uses drugs that are cell cycle specific. You should think of these guys as snipers. They don't just fire randomly, they wait. They wait for the cell to hit a very specific, very vulnerable moment in its cycle, and then they strike.
So one of the most vulnerable moments for any cell is when it's copying all of its DNA back in the S phase. I mean, it's a massive, super complex operation, which makes it the perfect time to throw a wrench in the works. Because if you can mess up the blueprint, the cell can't divide. Simple as that.
So how do we do that? Well, here are a couple of clever ways. You've got anti-metabolites, which are basically decoys. They trick the cell into using faulty building blocks to make its new DNA, which just doesn't work. Then you have topoisomerase inhibitors. These guys target the machinery that uncoils the DNA for copying. They cause the DNA to get into a hopeless tangle, stopping the whole process cold.
Okay, so what if the cell actually makes it past the DNA copying stage? Well, the next big chance for a precision strike is the M phase, mitosis. This is the physical act of splitting apart. And to do this, the cell builds this incredible internal skeleton made of tiny ropes called microtubules to pull itself in two. If we can mess with those ropes, division fails.
And this part is just brilliant. It shows two totally opposite but equally deadly approaches. On one side, you have the vinca alkaloids. They just stop the microtubule ropes from being built in the first place. No ropes, no division. But then you have the taxanes. They do the exact opposite. They make the ropes so ridiculously stable that they can't be taken apart after they're used. The cell gets frozen mid-division, completely stuck.
But what if you don't want to wait around for that perfect moment? That brings us to our second big strategy, the all-out assault. This uses drugs that are cell cycle non-specific. These are the heavy bombers. They could not care less what phase the cell is in. They attack anytime, anywhere.
And that really is the whole philosophy here. It doesn't matter if a cancer cell is actively dividing, just getting ready to divide, or even if it's in a resting state. These drugs can find it and do damage. And they usually do it by going straight for the command center, the DNA itself.
And these are the real heavy hitters of chemo. Alkylating agents are like little chemical grenades that cause direct physical damage to the DNA strands. Platinum compounds, like the famous cisplatinum, actually bind to the DNA and tie it in knots so it can't be read or copied. Then you've got anthracyclines, which mess with the enzymes that handle DNA, causing it to break. The goal is always the same: damage that blueprint so badly that the cell just can't survive.
Now, obviously, these strategies are incredibly powerful, but all that power comes at a cost. An all-out assault on rapidly dividing cells is going to cause some collateral damage, and that's what we know as side effects. It's a question anyone who's been close to this has asked, right? If these drugs are so smart, why do they make patients feel so awful? Well, the answer is all about what they target. Here's the fundamental problem.
chemotherapy isn't always great at telling the difference between a cancer cell and a healthy cell that also happens to divide really fast. And we have a lot of those. Our hair follicles, the lining of our stomach and intestines, our bone marrow, they're all constantly renewing themselves. The drugs see that rapid division and they attack them too, and that's what leads to things like hair loss, nausea, and low blood counts.
But here's the good news. Modern medicine has gotten incredibly clever about managing all this. This table shows just a few examples of specific toxicities and the rescue agents we've developed. For instance, cyclophosphamide can be tough on the bladder, so patients get a drug called Mesna to protect it. Cisplatin can really hurt the kidneys, so amifostine is used as a shield. Anthracyclines can damage the heart, so dextrazoxan can be used to clean up dangerous particles. It's this constant game of offense and defense.
And the list of these specific effects goes on. Some drugs can cause a painful reaction on the hands and feet. Another might cause inflammation in the pancreas. And that infamous severe nausea you hear about from cisplatin, it's now managed so much better with powerful anti-sickness drugs like ondansetron. So, understanding the side effects is just as important as knowing how the drugs work in the first place.
Now, with all this talk about collateral damage, there is a really important silver lining. Not all chemotherapy drugs are created equal, especially when it comes to the bone marrow, which is one of the most sensitive parts of the body during any treatment.
And these drugs right here are key examples. Vincristine, bleomycin, and L-asparaginase are all known for being way less harsh on the bone marrow. And this is a critical piece of the puzzle for oncologists. It lets them mix and match different drugs to maximize the cancer-killing power while minimizing some of the most dangerous side effects.
So as we start to wrap this up, it really all comes back to this. The war on cancer at the cellular level is fought on two main fronts. You either use the sniper approach, targeting a very specific weak point in the cell's schedule, or you use the bomber approach, unleashing overwhelming force to just destroy the cell's core programming, no matter the timing.
These chemical weapons have saved countless lives, there's no question, but they are a blunt instrument in what is an incredibly delicate fight. They're a monumental achievement, for sure, but the collateral damage is still really high, and that leads us to the big question for the future. As we understand this cellular battle map in even more detail, what will the next generation of smarter, more precise, and hopefully kinder weapons look like? That's the challenge ahead.